Lisa, welcome to the dish. How are you?
Great.
Good.
My name's Lisa Johnson, and I'm a food loss and waste expert. I'm an independent consultant and serving as a food loss and waste grant program manager. So, work on food loss and waste all the time, every day.
And that's pretty cool because you did your PhD at NC State. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
NC State is such a great school. I graduated in 2018 in horticultural science. So all three of my degrees are in horticultural science. So I think mostly in fruit and vegetables.
Right. And I think we actually overlapped for. I think I met you in well because I started at NC State in 2017. So I think we've met.
Yes.
I remember you were very stressed out. I remember that, and I was very stressed out because I was just started. And I was like, "Wow, there are like two people who are very stressed out, just meeting in the hallway."
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. So
You
after
know how
your PhD,
school is.
yeah, I know. Especially the last year, everybody wants to get finished.
Yeah.
Um, so how did you end up? So after your PhD, so today, fast forward like 6 years later, you are an independent consultant, and you're now also the grant manager of a large grant program
Mhm.
that really focuses on food loss and food waste recovery. So can you? How did you get there? So from your PhD to like, let's start with independent consultant because I think you do that for like a little bit longer.
Yeah, that's right. I became an independent consultant in 2019. It basically means I work for myself and I can tackle projects with people sort of up and down the chain across industries and work on projects that I'm interested in with people I want to work with. So it's really sort of empowering in that way, and also stressful. I'm always chasing down new projects. And I decided to go that way because I really wanted to work in government, in food loss and waste. But the government is just now catching up to the
Right.
real excitement in food loss and waste. So when I graduated, there weren't positions available in that. Same with academia, which is often a road to government work. But I was really interested in doing that. And I got the advice from a few of my professors to work for myself. And I thought, well, okay, that's a little crazy, but I started working for myself and found that I was in demand from my network to help them work through projects in food loss and waste. And so over time, I've done a lot of different things, and now have gotten linked up with SARE, which is a
Mhm.
great organization, to do sort of a big project of managing this grant. So I've had small and large projects. This would definitely be a large project.
Yeah. So what would be like in so over the last couple of years where you work as like independent consultant, mostly with food loss and waste recovery. So what were some of like the interesting projects that you were so what were like some of the stakeholders you worked with and then like one or two like examples of like really cool projects that you think are outstanding?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a huge industry now of people who are upcycling products and making products out of previous waste streams, given that the supply is still safe and edible to use. So I worked with a company like that, sort of a startup company that was creating an upcycled product and needed to know what supply was available in their area. So they
Mm,
invited me to do off kind of like a benchtop study, um, to determine how much surplus should be available in their state,
right.
that
Oh, in
they
the
would have
entire state.
access.
So for
Yeah,
everyone who doesn't understand what upcycling is, can you just explain that a little bit?
sure. Upcycling is taking a previous waste stream and turning it into a new product. So the easiest examples to understand are, for example, people who use spent grain from brewing and create a new granola type snack bar out of that. But you can upcycle just about anything, and people who have been adding value to products for a long time, that might be considered upcycling. So if you take, for example, all the small sweet potatoes and slice them and can them, that could be considered upcycling. But generally speaking, it's taking a waste stream and transforming it into something new.
And then that is so this upcycling is like seems to be like a big thing in the entire food and waste industry, and also like a way of creating new revenue and creating a new economy based on those products that are left over from food processing, for example. I think, or like,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, the yogurt industry has a lot of whey left over, and now
Hmm.
there are, adult beverages made from whey because of the upcycling industry. So, because of a focus on this area.
Right,
So,
right.
there's really great new things happening.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool. So is that was locally here in North Carolina, or was that like in another state?
No, it was in another state. And I'll give you another example of a great project I worked
Mhm.
on with Iowa State University and a tech company out of Colorado. We wanted to continue and expand on some of my work on measurement of losses in farm fields.
Mhm.
So we used remote sensing or drones to take images of sweet potatoes that were left behind in the harvest, and we used artificial intelligence to count and size those potatoes and
Mhm.
determine the economic value of what was left behind. So that was a really cool project.
I'm a scientist, so I work with data evaluation, data assessment all the time, and I know how difficult it is to get like reliable data and consistent data, especially that you then later also can compare. So, and I'm especially if we go to like portions of the supply chain where we probably don't get a lot of self-reporting
Hmm.
data. I feel like, and again, that's just my feeling. So, but I feel like that's like a big black like kind of void right now. We don't know really what is happening in that kind of area. We have like a sense, but we really would need to have like better data, a better database to really evaluate how much food is wasted or how much food is lost just on the agricultural level.
That's where I focused my work when I was at NC State, is trying to understand how much food is left unharvested in farm fields. And again, I think in fruit and vegetables. So that was the focus of my work. Um, even though the sort of study of food loss and waste is sort of new, we already have a good sense of what's wasted in homes, in restaurants, in schools and institutions, in grocery stores, in distribution. The one gap that was always missing and was missing at the time when I started my work is how much is left on farms and why. And so the work that I did there was really the first to put some numbers around how much is left behind in fields in the U.S. The food loss and waste terms have really evolved from the study of post-harvest loss, and really nobody is interested in post-harvest loss of specialty crops, which is what we call fruit and vegetable crops in the US, except a handful of horticulturists. But when that term has evolved to be food loss and food waste, suddenly lots of people care about it because, that's what we're eating every day. And so still, the study of food waste really got a lot further. Nobody was paying much attention to food loss. And food loss has always been a big issue in developing countries. But until I started working on it in the US, there really wasn't much attention given in developed countries at all. We're doing so many things well, and the things that we do well, we apply to developing countries and help them out. Um, but nobody had really turned the mirror on what we were doing here in the US. So it was exciting to do that work and be sort of a pioneer in that area. and find out that we're losing about 42% of our harvest in the field.
That's a lot. That's a lot of the
Yeah, it is a
harvest.
lot. It is. Well, fruit and vegetables are lost and wasted more than any other category of food,
Mm.
because they're perishable, because they're sold on appearance, and a lot of different reasons. But as it turns out, we focus so much on the harvested yield in our data collection and in our reporting that the total yield, what was actually produced, is never really discussed.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
in reality, we could have yields twice as high in certain crops as we do, but we're not harvesting everything for a huge number of reasons.
That is true. That is very true. And from a like production researcher side, we always assess those data. We always
Mhm.
assess what is marketable, what is non-marketable,
Mhm.
and for what reasons. Like blemishing or like size or whatever reasons we have disease.
Mhm.
But we never. It never is makes it into like a publication usually. Or if then it's on a side note or something. Because we focus
Yeah,
so much on what is marketable, and rather than
right.
yeah, and that is just yeah, that's just a mantra through the entire industry, really, I feel. And I cannot speak for
Yeah.
other crops. I know every specialty crop's a little bit different, but for the crops that I work with, I would say in a typical year is around 20% of what we're not
Mhm.
what we wouldn't sell. And then some growers have higher numbers, some growers have lower numbers. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I usually get a call when it's like at 80% or something. Then the grower
Yeah.
gets concerned. But that's 80%. That's a lot.
That's a lot, and it happens more often than you
Yeah,
think, and it
yeah, it
happens all
does.
around the country every day.
Yeah.
So it really adds up. I focused on vegetable production in North
Mhm.
Carolina doing my work, so annual vegetables. And some are up over 100%, like cucumber. There can be 10,000 pounds of cucumber left behind in the field that's perfectly edible. I mean, not in the field, per acre, that's edible,
Mhm.
fresh, healthy, and safe, but that doesn't get harvested maybe because it's the wrong size or shape or has a blemish that's perfectly fine to eat.
Right.
Um, and in some of our really high value crops like bell pepper and sweet potato, there's still upwards of 4,000 pounds per acre that get left behind.
Right. But then the
Um,
question is how many growers, because I mean no grower wants to leave like food in the field. So how many growers will be able to move this into like different markets, let's say from a grocery store or like a retail market that often has certain standards of like when to accept and non accept produce, to a direct to consumer market where the standards are lower, or to like a processing market where standards are lower. So how many growers have that opportunity to do this before they have to make the choice to like leave it in the field unpicked? So
That's a great question.
yeah.
That's one of the reasons I enjoyed measuring, because when you do an estimate of what's left in the field right now today, it empowers the grower to make phone calls without
Right.
investing in the harvest to see if they can move that crop at a price that justifies harvesting it. But
Right.
you're exactly right. There is a balance you have to meet between the cost of harvest and the price that the grower can get. And typically that's the reason that most of these crops are left behind, is that the price doesn't cover the cost of harvest. I
Right.
think many people still don't understand that most of the fruit and vegetables we see in the grocery store are harvested by hand. And that can be what makes them so expensive. They're expensive to produce, and they're expensive to pack and ship, and generally handle before they get to the grocery store shelf. And it's difficult for many people to afford those. So it can be very challenging.
So you mentioned like 42% of the harvest is left, correct?
Hmm.
So what happens to that 42%?
Yeah, generally it's tilled into the soil, unless the crop is grown on plastic mulch, in which case it's burned down with an herbicide and then swept away, and another crop is planted there. So in general, it's destroyed. In some cases, if it's tilled in, it becomes organic matter for the soil, which is not terrible, but it's not the highest and best use for food.
Food waste, food loss. Lisa,
Yes.
um, how in the world did you get interested in that? Did
Oh,
you just like grew up and then you came to the world and say, I'm gonna work at food waste and food loss. That's what I'm gonna do.
no,
Or how did it
not at
happen?
all.
I feel
Not
like
at
food
all.
waste is such a niche topic to be like, oh, yeah, I want to get into food waste. People will be like, what is that? Like, I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
Like, it's so niche.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird. So, I mean, we could back way up, but I'll try and keep it somewhat current. Um, I've studied horticulture my whole adult life. I've been to college 3 times. Um, each experience was different. When I was in undergrad, I dropped out twice because I thought college is just not for me. I'm not getting it. Um, I don't belong, whatever. And finally, I got back in and narrowed down all the list of majors and found horticulture, which is basically the art and science of growing plants. It focuses on a lot of our food crops. Um, and what I found is that I started getting excited about being in school and going to class every day. Did very well. Then I was so sick of being in school, I worked for about 10 years in the green industry. And I found out that while I enjoyed working in the green industry, I couldn't survive on the income that I was
Mhm.
getting. And I still wanted to know more about fruit and vegetables. I was just so interested in fruit and vegetables. So I decided to go back to school for my master's. And I thought, I still want to go to University of Georgia, and I will work with the fruit guy. I will work with whoever's working on fruits. And I met him, and he was a molecular physiologist. So I worked in the lab for about 6 years, um, doing molecular physiology, taking out DNA and RNA out of fruit to try and understand which genes are being expressed at any given time. And it was such amazing work, and I loved it. Um, at the same time, toward the end of that, I saw a presentation by a horticulturist or some type of plant scientist that had been working in developing countries. And he said basically that applied science brings your work to the world. And it got me thinking, I really want to make a difference in the world. Not that I wasn't, but I felt like one or two scientists might read my papers. And I really wanted to make a change. In the background, I was reading about food loss and waste in a couple of popular books at the time. Um, One was called Wasted by Tristram Stewart, a British writer, and the other was called American Wasteland by Jonathan Bloom, who lives in North Carolina, actually. And the parts that were written about the farm and the production level of our supply chain just blew my mind. I was like, this is not true. It's raising too many red flags for me. I'm a lifelong horticulturist. This can't be right. And I started digging in further on calling people, trying to understand where was the data on what was left behind on farms, and it didn't exist. It's difficult for people to become our artists and dancers and doctors if they're not adequately supplied with food.
Right.
So I was horrified that so much food is lost and wasted. especially when we have so much need at the same time. So I got into it for a more social reason than an environmental or economic
Mm-hmm.
reason. Yes, I mean, I was outraged. And so it really colored my research experience because I went into talking with growers with this outrage and ended up finding out that truly the things stopping us um, from preventing food loss and waste is really shame and blame, which is a little too touchy feely even for me.
Hmm.
I wanted to know hard numbers, not how people felt about it.
Right.
But in talking about it, you can see that growers are themselves just, mortified that they couldn't sell anything or they couldn't sell their whole crop, and they feel it's a failure. They don't want to be reminded about it. They certainly don't want to compare with their neighbor and see that they, lost more than their neighbor. So
Right.
it's a really, really challenging topic to even talk about. I certainly wasn't equipped to do any of that talking, but I did it anyway because we're supposed to talk about uncomfortable things. And eventually, some growers opened up and were able to talk to me about that issue. But it was very hard to get
I believe it.
in
Yeah.
that space. Yeah.
Where do you want to see like the universities go in this regard? Do you want, because I feel like that's a missed opportunity on the university level to, because there's, I mean, it's about, we talk all the time about the problem here, but it's also like a lot of opportunity, and a lot of people
Mhm.
and a lot
Yeah,
of companies
absolutely.
start, and there's so much opportunity for people to actually do something about this. And I feel this is a very empowering topic because there is actually something you can do about it. It's not that hard. You just have, think
Yeah.
there are so many things that you could do. And I feel we're missing out on that opportunity to teach about this and to like let students know, at least in on our level. I know it's not a massive topic at the university or any university I know. So
Well, you're absolutely right. The people that study or do research on post-harvest loss are the people working on food loss and waste. So it looks a lot of different ways. It might look like value added processing or entrepreneurship. It might look like sustainability. It might look like a lot of different things. So there's not usually a person dedicated to food loss and waste at a university.
no.
Um, the closest people, like I said, are the post harvest horticulture professors, and there's not one at every university. But
Right.
if you think about the way that research is funded, I think the answer might be there. Because the funding that agricultural research gets is very focused on a handful of products, right? Our big commodity crops typically, and then meat and poultry crops. Um, and specialty crop production research gets a small percentage of most of the agricultural research dollars, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
if
Mhm.
Yeah, and an even smaller portion of that goes to post-harvest research. So it's just a tiny fraction. It's been a tiny fraction of funding for so long that people have really had to advocate for their own programs to be relevant.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But the fact is, these programs are relevant to all of us 3 times a day. We have to understand how to handle our own food, how to preserve it for later use, how to keep it for a long term period, how to care for it because it's nourishing us. So, I think every university should have a massive post harvest department, but it's kind of few and far between. I know several of the post harvest specialists at universities around the country, and they are working so hard. They're doing such great work. Um, But
Yeah.
yeah, it's a real area of opportunity for universities.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. And I think you made a good point that there wasn't a lot of funding available for this type of issue recently. But that has, I mean, it's kind of changing. You're leading a big grant program now that
Yeah,
focuses completely on food waste and food loss, and I believe that's the first time that's actually happening in the United States. So that's pretty great. And
Cool.
it's pretty great.
it is really great. It's awesome. I hope to see more like of that, because I mean, I know
Yeah.
it's like a larger sum of money that's been distributed to, but it will only make a dent if this is the only time this is happening, you know. So I really hope that.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a drop in the bucket right now,
Right.
and it's
Right.
the funding is super generous, but so much more is needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
universities are eligible for this funding, um, and we're getting a lot of interest from nonprofits as
Right.
well because they're doing most of the food recovery
Right.
in the U.S.
For our listeners, that this grant program not necessarily addresses only consumer, which is probably most of us consumer needs, but it also is specifically designed to develop resources that can then be used by other organizations that also work in the food
Yeah,
loss and waste realm. So it can also be producing consumer education resources, and I really hope that there will be a grant that does that, because I think it's very needed, you know.
it
But
is.
it's not specifically only for consumers. So that is really important to understand, that this grant program addresses really the entire spectrum across the entire supply chain. And but I hope that one project will be awarded that does also talk to consumers, because I think that consumer education piece is really important too. Yeah.
Yeah, we're looking for projects to span the supply chain. So
Right.
there will be
Right.
projects working in agriculture, projects working in retail, in restaurants, and in homes
Yeah.
or with
Yeah.
consumers.
Yeah.
So we are excited to see that.
Right. Yeah. Me too. I think this is really important. So like on like a global big picture, or like nationwide big picture kind of level, um, where do you see, like, what do you think, like in a, let's say 50 years from now, where should we be in terms of like our food production system, and compared to where we're at now? Just like your personal opinion. What would you like to see in 50 years from now? When your
Well, I
kids are
mean,
old, you know, and like everything. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I hope my personal opinion doesn't get me in trouble, but um,
Not with me.
you know, we have a huge population globally that that has nutrition needs,
Hmm.
and we don't produce food that way to serve those humans. Our growers are independent and grow what they choose to grow. And so I think that if we did a little more planning, a little more incentivizing, we could meet everyone's needs with the land that we have, if we were a little more strategic about it.
Yeah. That's like I want to add that this is even true for the United States, not just globally. I mean, in the United States, we have a lot of people that are underserved, nutrition
Absolutely.
wise, you know, and that would be probably the first step. Yeah.
Yeah, we have 900 million acres of farmland in the
Hmm.
US, and about 2 million is used for fruit and vegetables.
Hmm.
Um, I would love to see fruit and vegetables elevated as the essential foods they are. And I think that the food as medicine movement is sort of celebrating fruit and vegetables a little bit better.
Yeah.
But we all need them. It doesn't matter, if we can afford them or not. We all need them. And so I'm hopeful that our systems will be able to match that unmet demand, um, with some better planning.
So I know we spoke about the grant, um, but
Mhm.
we didn't really speak about like if somebody listening or watching wherever you're enjoying our podcast. We didn't really speak about like how they can, if they wanted to, how they can apply for this grant.
Mhm.
So how can an organization, group of nonprofits apply?
The grant is open to organizations in all of our US states and territories, but it is hosted through Southern SARE, which is based at the University of Georgia. So you would just, the easiest way to find information about the grant would be to go to ssare.org. That is southernsare.org. And you can find the Food Loss and Waste Grant there.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right, Lisa. It has been a pleasure. We have
Yeah.
at the end, we ask every candidate to choose one of the 3 questions that we have. I'm gonna give you, this is my favorite part. So
Okay.
we have 3 questions. The first question is a myth buster. If you have a myth or a misconception that you want people to know about, and that would be the question you would choose. The second question is you have superpower. We only had one guest so far who took superpower, so it's like vastly underused. And that is basically you have the power to change one thing. You have a one-time power. You can change one thing. That's it. So what would it be?
Uh-huh.
And then there's the third question, which is basically if there's something that we didn't ask you, but you're really itchy to get it out. So that would be like the third question. So choice is yours.
Oh my gosh. Let's see. So the superpower or something we didn't talk about. What was the first one?
Myth, like a myth or misconception.
Okay. Let's see. Well, okay. I'll talk about a myth or misconception.
All right.
There's been a trend.
That's by far the question that's taken by the most people.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
you go ahead.
There's been a trend last few years in reducing food loss and waste to sell or provide ugly fruit and vegetables. And I think that that's a really charming way to get that across, that, the fruit or vegetable is ugly, meaning it's imperfect in some way. But a lot of times people think that that means damaged, diseased, or rotten. And that's far from the case. What it means is that it's misshapen, might be miscolored, might have a healed blemish from an insect sting or a wind scar, or it might be too big or too small. Sometimes produce gets rejected even because it's in the wrong type of packaging.
Mhm.
So, these sort of constraints and shortcomings within our system can lead to a lot of safe, fresh, healthy, edible, delicious produce to be lost. So if you have a chance to purchase ugly produce, I would suggest giving it a try and going for it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
Certainly
And
it's not rotten.
I would replace ugly with imperfect because it makes it, makes it like all of us,
Right.
So, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, actually sometimes food gets rejected because it just arrives at the wrong time. So
Uh-huh.
there are some retailers that if the truck doesn't arrive within like a 2-hour window or something, it's going to be rejected no matter what, so
Yep. And it's
yeah.
very likely it could end up in a landfill.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So,
Great. Thanks, Lisa. This was a lot of joy. Is there any way people can reach you, or do you have like a social media presence or anything that you want to let people know where to find you or follow you or something like that?
sure.
Then
I can send you the LinkedIn,
yeah,
link.
we have the LinkedIn account. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I use most is
Mhm.
LinkedIn. I do have a website. It's just lisakjohnson.com.
Okay. And
And
we're
people can,
gonna put that all somewhere into the video here. All right. Thanks.